The library orbited a dead star. It was the oldest place in the galaxy that still had power running through its walls. They called it the Vault of Last Words, and it held the final messages of every civilization that had ever lived and died across the stars. Over 400 species had risen, built empires, touched the edges of forever, and then vanished. Their last screams, their last prayers, their last warnings, all of it was stored here, in data crystals that glowed faintly in the dark, like trapped ghosts. Yelen Drotha walked through the silent corridors, with 6 legs clicking softly on the cold metal floor. He was a Velusi, tall, thin, covered in a hard shell the color of dark copper. His 4 eyes blinked in sequence as he read the identification plates on each archive shelf. He was young for an archivist. Most of his kind considered this work boring. Cataloging the dead was not a glamorous job. But Yelen had always believed that the dead had things to say, if only someone would listen. His assignment was simple. The Galactic Conclave, the governing body of 31 living spacefaring species, wanted him to update the Threat Index. This was a database that tracked why civilizations died, so that living ones could avoid the same mistakes. Most entries were predictable: war, disease, greed, resource collapse. Sometimes a species would meet something bigger and meaner than itself and simply get eaten. The galaxy was not a kind place. Yelen settled into his workstation and began pulling records. He moved through them quickly at first. The Dornali, wiped out by a fungal plague they accidentally brought back from a moon. The Grish Imperium, civil war lasting 900 years until no one was left to fight. The Kelani, consumed by the Hollow Swarm, a mindless predator species that stripped worlds bare like locusts. Sad stories, all of them, but familiar ones. Then he found something strange. It was in the final record of a species called the Murvas, a race of aquatic beings that had gone extinct roughly 2 million years ago. Their last entry was a warning, directed at anyone who might find it. It said in translation, "Stay away from the third world of the Yellow Star in Arm 3C. It does not sleep, it only pretends." Yelen read it twice. It was an odd thing to say. He marked it and moved on. 3 hours later, he found the same warning again. This time it came from the Thesic, a silicon-based species that had died out 5 million years ago on the other side of the galaxy. They had never met the Morvas. They had never even existed in the same era. And yet their final archive entry contained almost the same words. If you find the sleeping world in Arm 3C, do not touch it. Do not land. Do not even look too long. It knows when it is being watched. Yelen felt a chill move through his shell. He started searching with purpose now, pulling records faster, scanning final entries with all 4 eyes working at once. The Or-Kuthai, extinct, 11 million years ago. The blue world pretends to be harmless. It is not. The Fenari, gone 40 million years ago. We sent 12 ships to the third planet of the Yellow Star. None returned. The planet is awake. It has always been awake. One after another, the warnings piled up. By the time Yelen stopped counting, he had found 137 separate civilizations, spread across millions of years and vast distances of space, all warning about the same world. They had nothing in common. Different biology, different technology, different languages, different ages. Some were peaceful explorers, some were violent conquerors. Some were so alien that their very concept of communication was barely translatable. But they all said the same thing. Stay away from that planet. And they were all dead. Yelen brought his findings to his superior, High Curator Menval, an older Velusi whose shell had gone white with age. Menval listened with the patience of someone who had heard too many young archivists get excited about nothing. Coincidence, Menval said, waving one of his upper arms dismissively. Or shared myth. Spacefaring cultures often develop similar superstitions about certain star systems. It means nothing. 137 times, Yellen pressed, across 50 million years, species that never knew each other existed? The galaxy is large and full of echoes, Menval said. File your report and move on. But Yellen could not move on. He went back to his station and did something he was not supposed to do. He cross-referenced the star coordinates mentioned in the warnings with the Conclave's modern star maps. Arm 3C, a G-type yellow star, unremarkable, middle-aged. 8 planets in orbit. The third one was small, covered mostly in water, wrapped in a thin atmosphere of nitrogen and oxygen. The Conclave's most recent survey had classified it simply: pre-industrial biosphere. Primitive sapient species detected. No strategic value. Monitoring deferred. The planet had a name in the local species language. They called it Earth. Yellen stared at the file. A small, quiet world, home to soft, short-lived creatures who had not even left their own moon more than a handful of times. The galactic community had looked at Earth and seen nothing worth worrying about, nothing worth visiting, nothing worth fearing. But 137 dead civilizations disagreed. Yellen dug deeper. He searched for the Conclave's most recent survey probe, the one set to the Sol system 6 years ago for a routine scan. He expected to find a boring data file full of atmospheric readings and biological surveys. Instead, he found nothing. The probe had gone silent. Its entire data stream had cut off without explanation. The last thing it had sent back was a single burst of telemetry, a short phrase in a language the probe's translation systems could not identify. It had been flagged as a malfunction and filed away. No one had looked at it twice. Yellen opened the file. He ran the phrase through every linguistic database the vault possessed: living languages, dead languages, theoretical language structures. It took 4 hours, but eventually the system found a match. The language was English, spoken by the dominant species on the third planet. The translation appeared on his screen, and Yellen felt his blood go cold. It read, "We see you looking." He sat in the dark for a long time after that, the glow of the data screen reflecting in all 4 of his eyes. Around him, the vault of last words hummed quietly, holding the silence of 400 dead worlds. Somewhere, impossibly far away, a small blue planet turned slowly in the light of its yellow star. It looked peaceful. It looked harmless. It looked like it was sleeping. But Yellen Drotha now knew, with a certainty that sat in his chest like a stone, that it was not. Yellen did not sleep that night. He sat in his private study aboard the Conclave station, surrounded by floating data screens, each one filled with the dying words of a dead civilization. The warnings blurred together after a while. Different languages, different species, but always the same fear, the same planet, the same message: stay away. But Yellen needed more than warnings. He needed to understand what had actually happened. Warnings told him that something was wrong with Earth. He needed to know what that something was. He went back to the oldest record in the vault. It belonged to the Rekvanu, a reptilian species that had once ruled 12,000 star systems. They had been the most powerful civilization the galaxy had ever seen. Their ships could cross the galaxy in weeks. Their weapons could crack moons in half. Their scientists had mapped the structure of space-time itself. They had feared nothing, because nothing in the galaxy had ever given them a reason to. They had gone extinct 65 million years ago, by Earth's calendar. Every other record of their civilization had been lost or destroyed. But here, in the vault of last words, their final archive remained, stored not as data, but as something far more intimate. The Rekvanu had developed a technology called memory logging, a way of recording lived experience directly into biological crystals. To access them was not to read a report. It was to live through someone else's eyes. Yellen placed the crystal against the base of his skull, where the Velusi neural interface could connect with it, and closed all four of his eyes. When he opened them, he was someone else. He was Commander Soth of the Rekvanu 3rd Expansion Fleet, standing on the bridge of a warship the size of a small city. Through the viewing ports, a yellow star burned in the distance, and around it turned 8 worlds. Soth's attention was fixed on the third one, a blue and green jewel, rich with water, wrapped in clouds. His scanner officers reported a biosphere of extraordinary density. Massive creatures roamed the surface, towering reptiles, winged beasts, ocean predators the size of submarines. The atmosphere was thick and warm. The soil was fertile beyond anything in the fleet's colonial database. It was perfect, a paradise waiting to be claimed. Soth gave the order. Landing teams deployed. Atmospheric processors were set up to begin adjusting the air for Rekvanu lungs. Tectonic stabilizers were planted to calm the planet's surprisingly active geology. Biological samplers began cataloging the native life. Everything proceeded according to standard colonial procedure. Then things started to go wrong, slowly at first, in ways that were easy to dismiss. Equipment failed. Not in the way machines normally fail, with worn parts or power loss, but in ways that made no sense. A drilling unit shut itself down and refused to restart, as if something had simply told it to stop. Navigation beacons rearranged their own frequencies overnight. A geological scanner produced a reading that, when mapped visually, looked like a face staring back at the operator. The technician who saw it refused to return to work. The survey teams reported something worse. They said they felt watched. Not by the giant creatures that roamed the surface. Those animals largely ignored the Rekvanu, as if they were beneath notice. The feeling came from the land itself, from the ground beneath their feet, from the trees, from the rivers, from the sky. One scout described it as standing inside the eye of something enormous, and feeling its attention shift toward you. Soth was a soldier, not a mystic. He dismissed the reports as nerves. New worlds were always unsettling. But then his chief scientist came to him with something that could not be dismissed. They had performed a deep core scan of the planet, a standard procedure that mapped the interior of a world down to its center. Every planet had the same basic structure: crust, mantle, core, rock, magma, metal. Simple geology. Earth was different. The mantle, the vast layer of molten rock beneath the crust, contained structures, not natural formations, not mineral deposits, patterns, vast interlocking networks that stretched across the entire interior of the planet, woven through the magma like threads in fabric. They pulsed with energy that did not match any known geological process. The chief scientist, speaking carefully, said they resembled a nervous system, as if the planet had a brain made of fire and stone, and it was wrapped around the core like 2 hands holding a beating heart. The structures were old, impossibly old. The dating methods placed them at over 4 billion years, older than the planet's own crust. Whatever was inside Earth had not been put there. It had been there first. The planet had formed around it. Soth ordered an immediate withdrawal, but the universe did not give him time. The fleet's long-range sensors detected an object entering the star system at tremendous speed. An asteroid, massive, dense, moving on a trajectory that the fleet's navigators calculated, and then calculated again because the numbers made no sense. The asteroid was not drifting. It was not following any natural orbital path. Like a stone thrown by an invisible hand, it was heading directly for Earth. There was no time to evacuate the surface teams. The asteroid struck with the force of 1 billion nuclear weapons. The sky turned white. The surface burned. The giant creatures, the magnificent reptiles that had ruled the planet for 100 million years, died in minutes. So did every Rekvanu on the ground. From orbit, Commander Soth watched the planet burn. And then he watched something that haunted him for the rest of his short life. The planet began to heal. Not slowly, the way a wounded world might gradually recover over millions of years. It started immediately. The fires died, as if smothered by invisible hands. The dust in the atmosphere began to settle in patterns that should have taken centuries, but happened in days. Deep below the ruined surface, the scanners showed the mantle structures pulsing faster, stronger, like a heart pumping blood to a wound. The asteroid had not hurt Earth. It had cleaned it. The biosphere that the Rekvanu had been trying to colonize, the giant reptiles, the forests, the ecosystems, all of it had been shed like dead skin, and beneath it, something new was already beginning to grow. The planet had burned away everything on its surface to remove one thing, the Rekvanu. Soth fled the system with what remained of his fleet. He sent his warning to every Rekvanu outpost he could reach, but it did not matter. Within 100 years, strange plagues began appearing on Rekvanu worlds, diseases that no medical science could explain or cure. Civil wars erupted over nothing, fueled by a creeping madness that spread through the ruling caste like poison in water. Scientists went insane. Leaders turned on each other. Within 400 years, the greatest civilization the galaxy had ever known was gone. 12,000 star systems, empty. Billions of lives, ended. Their final archive entry, the one Yellen was now living through the memory of, was recorded by Commander Soth himself, old and dying on a ruined world. His voice was quiet, broken, and full of a fear that had never left him. "We touched the sleeping world," Soth said. "It did not wake. It did not need to. It simply dreamed us into ruin. Do not go there. Do not touch it. Whatever lives inside that planet, it is older than the stars, and it does not forgive." The memory ended. Yellen pulled the crystal from his skull and sat trembling in his chair. His mind was racing. He pulled up the geological history of Earth, the one compiled by the Conclave survey teams from long-range observation. 5 mass extinction events in the planet's history. 5 times, the surface of Earth had been wiped nearly clean of life. Scientists across the galaxy had always assumed these were natural disasters. Asteroids, volcanic eruptions, climate shifts. Yellen now knew the truth. He cross-referenced the dates of each extinction event with the vault's records of alien civilizations known to have visited the Sol system. Every extinction matched. Every single one. The extinctions were not disasters. They were not accidents. They were not random acts of a cruel universe. They were an immune system fighting off an infection. And right now, in the present day, the most powerful military fleet in the galaxy, the Thyrak hegemony, was about to poke the sleeping giant with a very sharp stick. The high chamber of the Galactic Conclave was a vast dome floating in open space, anchored to nothing, sustained by the combined technology of 31 species. Inside, representatives of every living spacefaring civilization sat in tiered rows that curved upward like the inside of a bowl, each section shaped to fit the body type of its occupants. Some sat, some floated, some hung from perches. One species existed only as a column of light. Yellen Drotha stood at the center of the floor, feeling very small. He had spent 3 days preparing his presentation. He had organized the warnings, the memory logs, the extinction data, the probe silence, everything laid out in a clear, logical sequence that he believed no reasonable mind could dismiss. He had been wrong about that. "You are telling us," said War Admiral Gorath of the Thyrak hegemony, leaning forward in his seat with a mouth full of sharp teeth visible behind a thin smile, "that a planet is alive, that a small, wet rock in an unimportant corner of the galaxy has been killing civilizations for millions of years, and your evidence is old stories and broken probes." Gorath was enormous, nearly 3 meters tall, covered in thick gray fur, built like a creature designed for violence and refined by 10,000 years of military culture. The Thyrak were the galaxy's current dominant power. Their fleet was the largest. Their weapons were the most advanced. They had conquered or intimidated every species they had ever encountered, and they carried themselves with the confidence of beings who had never met anything they could not kill. "It is not old stories," Yellen said, keeping his voice steady. "It is 137 independent records spanning 50 million years. The pattern is that primitive species are superstitious," Goreth interrupted. "They see things they do not understand, and they make up monsters. I have looked at your little blue planet, Archivist. I have read the survey reports. It is home to a species of soft primates, who have barely figured out how to leave their own atmosphere. They fight each other with chemical explosives. They have not even detected our observation satellites." He leaned back and spread his massive arms. "This is what you want us to fear?" Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Some delegates nodded in agreement. Others shifted uncomfortably. Then the voice of Ilwyn spoke. The Ilwyn Collective was the oldest living civilization in the galaxy. They had long ago abandoned physical bodies, existing now as beings of pure energy, slow, patient, and very difficult to read. Their representative appeared as a softly glowing shape that hovered above its platform like a small, quiet sun. When it spoke, the words seemed to come from everywhere at once. "We have listened to that world for 11,000 years, the voice said. Its tone carried no emotion, but the chamber went silent anyway. When the Ilwyn spoke, beings listened. "It hums, in frequencies that no natural geology produces, in patterns that no natural process explains. We have studied these patterns for longer than most of your civilizations have existed. We do not know what they mean, but we know what they feel like." It paused. The glow pulsed once. "They feel like breathing," it said. "We will not touch that world. We advise you to do the same." The chamber erupted into argument. Delegates shouted over each other in a dozen languages. The Thyrak delegation dismissed the Ilwyn as timid relics. The Velusi called for further study. 3 smaller species demanded that the Sol system be declared a quarantine zone. Nothing was resolved. Nothing was agreed upon. Yellen left the chamber, feeling hollow. He had shown them the truth, and they had turned it into politics. He did not know, none of them knew, that War Admiral Goreth had already made his decision before the session even began. 2 days earlier, Goreth had quietly authorized the deployment of a forward fleet. 200 warships, fully armed, already on course for the Sol system. The mission was classified. The objective was simple: arrive at Earth, establish orbital dominance, and bring the native species under Thyrak control before the Conclave could vote on the matter. By the time the politicians finished arguing, Goreth intended to present them with a finished conquest. Far away from the politics and the arguments and the fleets, on the surface of the very planet everyone was arguing about, a woman named Lena Vasquez was staring at a screen full of impossible numbers. Lena was a geologist. She worked at a deep Earth observatory in northern Chile, a facility built into the side of a mountain, designed to monitor seismic activity across the South American plate. It was quiet work, mostly. Earthquakes were predictable things. The Earth moved in patterns that science understood well. Except lately, it did not. For the past 18 months, Lena had been detecting anomalous readings from deep within the Earth's mantle, far deeper than any normal seismic activity should register. The readings were faint, rhythmic, and structured in ways that no geological model could explain. They pulsed, not randomly, the way magma currents might cause vibrations, but in repeating sequences, like a signal, like a code. She had presented her findings at 2 conferences. Both times, she had been politely told that her instruments were malfunctioning. One senior colleague had taken her aside and gently suggested that she was reading patterns into noise, the way people see faces in clouds. She had gone home and checked her instruments. They were working perfectly. The readings continued. They were getting stronger. Lena sat in her small office that evening, drinking cold coffee and watching the real-time seismic display. The lines moved in their usual gentle waves, the planet's normal background noise. Then, as she watched, something happened that made her put down her cup very slowly. All the lines synchronized. For exactly 4 seconds, every seismic sensor in her network, 12 stations spread across 1,000 kilometers, registered the same reading at the same time. The same frequency, the same amplitude, the same rhythm. As if the entire continental plate beneath her had pulsed once, like a single heartbeat. Then it was gone. The lines returned to normal. The instruments showed nothing unusual. If she had blinked, she would have missed it. But Lena had not blinked. She pulled up the data and stared at it. 12 stations. Perfect synchronization. The odds of that happening naturally were so small that the number was effectively 0. Something beneath the crust of the Earth had just moved in a coordinated way, across a distance that should have been impossible for any geological process. She thought about the patterns she had been seeing for 18 months. The rhythmic pulses from the deep mantle, the structured sequences that looked like signals, the way the readings seemed almost responsive, changing slightly whenever she adjusted her instruments, as if something down there knew it was being observed. Lena Vasquez was a scientist. She believed in data and evidence and rational explanation. But sitting alone in her office at the edge of a desert, watching the afterimage of that impossible synchronization fade from her screen, she felt something she had not felt since she was a child, lying in the grass and pressing her ear to the ground. She felt like the Earth was listening back. 10,000 light-years away, the Fyrak forward fleet punched through the void at maximum speed, 200 warships carrying enough firepower to glass a continent, commanded by officers who believed they were going to claim a primitive world from a helpless species. None of them knew what was waiting for them. None of them understood what they were about to wake up. But deep below the surface of a small blue planet, in the spaces between rock and fire, where the mantle structures pulsed with ancient energy, something stirred. It was not awake, not yet, but for the first time in 66 million years, it was no longer fully asleep. It was dreaming, and in its dream it felt footsteps approaching, heavy, careless, and full of bad intentions. The Earth did what it had always done. It waited. It watched through 8 billion pairs of eyes that did not know they were watching. It listened through 8 billion pairs of ears that did not know they were listening. And somewhere in Chile, Lena Vasquez pressed her hand flat against the stone wall of her observatory, and for just a moment, so brief she almost convinced herself she had imagined it, she felt the wall press back. The Fyrak fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sol system, and immediately, something felt wrong. War Admiral Gorath stood on the command bridge of the flagship Ironjaw, watching the tactical display populate with data. 8 planets, 1 yellow star. Everything matched the survey files. And yet, his navigation officers were frowning at their consoles, tapping controls, running recalculations. "Report," Gorath said. "The star positions are wrong, Admiral," the lead navigator said, her voice uncertain. "Our stellar reference maps do not match what we are seeing. The background stars appear to be in incorrect positions. Deviation is small, less than half a degree, but it is consistent across all sensors." "Instrument error," Gorath said. "All 200 ships are reporting the same deviation, Admiral." Gorath said nothing for a moment. Half a degree was nothing, a rounding error. But it nagged at him, the way a loose tooth nags at a tongue. Stars did not move. Stars were the one thing you could trust in a universe full of chaos. If the stars were wrong, then either every instrument in the fleet had failed at the same moment, or something was interfering with what they could see. He pushed the thought away and gave the order to advance. The fleet moved inward through the system. They passed gas giants and ice worlds without interest. Their target was the third planet, the small blue one, growing steadily larger on every screen. As they approached, the fleet's artificial intelligence systems began issuing advisories. Not warnings exactly, more like reluctance. Status reports that said everything was operational, but somehow conveyed hesitation. One ship's AI, when asked to calculate optimal orbital positions above Earth, responded with a 7-second delay before producing results. The Fyrak had built these systems. They did not delay. But here, in this quiet corner of the galaxy, they did. The fleet took position in high orbit above Earth. Below them, the planet turned slowly, blue and white and green, absurdly beautiful. Gorath studied the surface through magnified displays. He could see cities, clusters of light on the night side, organized grids of structures on the day side. Roads, vehicles, aircraft, primitive satellites in low orbit, so crude they were barely worth avoiding. The creatures that had built all of this were small, soft, and everywhere. 8 billion of them, covering the surface like moss on a rock. They had no energy shields, no orbital weapons, no fleet. They did not even know the Fyrak were there. Gorath smiled. "Target an unpopulated zone on the largest northern continent," he said. "Flat terrain, no settlements within 50 kilometers. Standard demonstration protocol." The kinetic round, launched from the Iron Jaw's forward battery, a dense tungsten slug accelerated to a fraction of the speed of light. It was designed to hit the ground with enough force to leave a crater visible from orbit. A message written in destruction. "We are here. You are ours." The round entered the atmosphere. It screamed downward through the clouds, burning white with friction. Then, 14 kilometers above the surface, it stopped. Not slowed, not deflected, stopped. It hung in the air for 2 full seconds, as if the sky had reached out and caught it in an invisible fist. Then it came apart, not exploding, dissolving. The tungsten broke down into dust, then into molecules, then into nothing. The atmosphere swallowed it like water absorbing a drop of ink. The bridge went silent. "Misfire," Gorath said, though his voice was less certain than before. "Reload and fire again." The same thing happened. The round stopped, dissolved, vanished. No energy signature, no shield frequency, no technology they could detect. The air itself had simply refused to let the weapon through. "Full bombardment," Gorath ordered, and now there was an edge in his voice that his crew had never heard before. "All ships, all batteries, fire everything." 200 warships opened fire at once. Thousands of kinetic rounds, plasma charges, and fusion munitions rained down on the planet in a storm of destruction that should have turned the surface to glass. Every single one was neutralized. Some dissolved like the first. Some curved away and flew into the sun, as if gently redirected. Some simply ceased to exist mid-flight, blinking out of reality like candles in a wind. Not one weapon touched the ground. The fleet's sensors scanned desperately for an explanation, a defense grid, a hidden fleet, anything. They found nothing. No technology. No mechanism of any kind. The planet was not defending itself with weapons. It was defending itself with something the Fyrak had no name for. Something that operated on a level their science could not reach. On the surface below, 8 billion humans felt the ground tremble. It was not an earthquake. It was deeper than that. It came from everywhere at once, a vibration that traveled up through the bedrock, through the foundations of buildings, through the soles of shoes, through bare feet on grass. People stopped what they were doing. Conversations paused. Children looked up from their play. In every city, in every village, on every continent, the same sensation rippled through the human species like a wave. In Chile, Lena Vasquez was running through the corridors of her observatory when her instruments exploded. Not mechanically, the readings spiked so far beyond their maximum range that the screens simply shattered. She stumbled into the main monitoring room and saw every display blazing with data that should not have been possible. The deep mantle readings she had been tracking for 18 months, those faint, rhythmic pulses, were no longer faint. They were screaming, and for the first time, they were synchronized, not across 1,000 kilometers, across the entire planet. Every pulse, every pattern, every signal she had ever detected was now beating in unison, like a single enormous heart that had just remembered how to pump. The oceans began to glow. From orbit, the Thyrak watched in stunned silence as soft blue light spread across the surface of Earth's waters, rising from the depths, illuminating the waves from below, turning the oceans into fields of cold fire. The light moved in patterns, lines and curves that traced designs too large to see from the surface, but perfectly clear from space. Then, the continents moved. Not drifting, the way tectonic plates normally moved over millions of years. They shifted, deliberately. Plates that had been locked in place since before humanity existed slid apart with impossible smoothness. And from the gaps between them, structures rose. Vast shapes pushing up through the mantle. Not made of rock, not made of metal, made of something the Thyrak scanners could not identify. They were the size of mountain ranges, and they were shaped with obvious purpose. The planet was not breaking apart. It was opening up. It was showing what was underneath. Gorith found his voice. All ships, full retreat, now. The engines fired. Nothing happened. The ships did not move. Earth's gravitational field had changed. Not increased, not decreased, but become something else entirely. It was selective now. It held each ship exactly where it was, gently, precisely, the way a hand might hold a small bird. Not crushing, not threatening, just holding. On the surface, every human being heard a voice. It did not come through their ears. It came through their bodies, through their bones, through their blood, through the electricity in their nerves. It was not loud. It was the quietest sound any of them had ever heard, and yet it drowned out everything else. It said, "Thank you for keeping watch. I am awake now. You have done so well." There was no panic. That was the strangest part. 8 billion people heard a voice from inside the earth, and instead of screaming, instead of running, they felt calm. They felt safe. They felt the way a child feels when they wake from a nightmare and realize their parent is sitting beside them, and has been there the whole time. Tears fell on every continent, not from fear, from relief, from a feeling so deep and so old that no human language had a word for it. The feeling of finally understanding why they had always known, in some quiet corner of their hearts, that the earth was alive, that it loved them, that they belonged to it, and it to them. Far above, held motionless in the planet's gentle grip, War Admiral Gorith sank into his command chair and stared at the world below. The arrogance had drained from his face. What replaced it was something old, something that lived in every predator that had ever encountered something bigger than itself. Then the Conclave's communication array lit up with an incoming transmission. Not from the Thyrak fleet, not from the humans, from the planet. Broadcast on every frequency, in every known language, living and dead. 31 species heard it simultaneously, each in their own tongue. It said, "I remember all of you. We should talk." The galaxy held its breath. For 3 days after the transmission, no one knew what to do. The galactic conclave dissolved into chaos. Some species began evacuating their homeworlds, convinced that what had awakened on Earth was a predator that would consume the galaxy. Others fell into religious ecstasy, declaring that a god had returned. Military fleets across 1,000 systems went to high alert, pointing their weapons at a target they knew, in their deepest instincts, they could not fight. The Thyrak hegemony recalled every warship to defend their core worlds. War Admiral Gorath's fleet was still held in Earth's orbit, untouched, unharmed, but unable to leave. Gorath himself had not spoken since the transmission. He sat on his bridge and stared at the planet below, with the hollow expression of a being whose entire understanding of the universe had been quietly dismantled. The Illwind Collective, the oldest civilization in the galaxy, said a single word when the transmission reached them. Their voice spoke it without emotion, without surprise, with the calm patience of someone who had been waiting for a very long time. Finally. Then they went silent and said nothing more. On Earth, the world had not ended. That was the remarkable thing. The ocean still glowed faintly with deep blue light. The great structures that had risen from the mantle stood like new mountain ranges, humming with quiet energy. But the cities were intact. The people were alive. The birds still sang in the morning. The world had changed in the most fundamental way imaginable, and yet it had not broken. Humanity adapted the way it always did, with confusion, argument, wonder, and stubborn determination to make sense of things. Governments held emergency sessions. Scientists scrambled to study the new structures. Religious leaders declared miracles or apocalypses depending on their temperament. But underneath all the noise, there was a strange calm that no one could quite explain. The voice they had heard, that deep, bone-level whisper, had left something behind. A feeling. Not a thought, not a command, just a warmth, like being told you were loved by someone who meant it completely. Lena Vasquez was the first human to make direct contact. She did not plan it. She was not chosen by any government or committee. She simply walked deeper into her observatory, past the shattered instruments, past the cracked walls where the mountain had shifted, down corridors that had not existed 3 days ago. The earth had opened a path for her, smooth and warm, sloping gently downward into the deep rock. She followed it because something in her gut told her to, the same instinct that had made her spend 18 months studying signals everyone else dismissed as noise. The tunnel led her to a chamber 2 kilometers below the surface. It was vast, cathedral-sized, lit by the same soft blue glow that shone from the oceans. The walls were not stone. They were alive. They pulsed gently, like tissue, like the inside of something breathing. And in the center of the chamber, rising from the floor like a tree made of light and crystal, was a structure that Lena understood, without being told, was a point of contact. A place where the planet could speak and be spoken to. She placed her hand on it, and the gardener told her everything. It spoke not in words, but in understanding, knowledge that unfolded inside her mind like a flower opening. She saw the truth of what Earth was, and it was bigger than anything she had imagined. Earth was a gardener, one of a primordial race of beings so old that they predated the current galaxy. Before the stars that now burned in the sky had even formed, the gardeners had existed, vast, slow, patient entities that lived on a scale of time that made civilizations look like mayflies. They were not gods. They were something stranger. They were planters, nurturers. They had seeded the young galaxy with the building blocks of life, scattering organic potential across billions of worlds, and then they had gone to sleep. Not because they were tired, because growing things takes time. The gardeners understood, in a way no short-lived species ever could, that life needed space to develop on its own. So they embedded themselves into young planets, wrapped themselves in stone and fire, and slept for billions of years, trusting that when they woke, the galaxy would be full of living worlds and the species that called them home. But the galaxy had not been kind to sleeping gods. Most gardeners never woke, The planets they inhabited were colonized, mined, hollowed out, and destroyed by the very civilizations that had evolved around them, or by other species that came from far away and took what they wanted without understanding what they were taking. Some gardeners were killed in their sleep, their structures ripped apart by deep-core mining operations that mistook a nervous system for a mineral deposit. Others were poisoned by pollution, radiation, or the toxic byproducts of industrial civilizations that never thought to wonder whether their world might be more than rock. The 400 extinct species in the Vault of Last Words, many of them had killed gardeners without ever knowing what they had done. And the psychic backlash of a dying gardener was devastating. Plagues that no medicine could cure, madness that spread like wildfire, civilizations that tore themselves apart from the inside, driven by a grief and rage that was not their own, but bled into them from the dying mind beneath their feet. Earth was the last one, the only gardener that had survived. It had survived because it fought back, not with intention, but with instinct. Every time a civilization had come to Earth and tried to take root, the gardener's sleeping immune system had responded. Asteroids redirected, magnetic fields disrupted, and when all else failed, the nuclear option, a mass extinction event that burned the surface clean and started over. It was not cruelty, it was self-defense. The gardener was asleep. It could not reason or negotiate. It could only protect itself the way any sleeping creature does, by thrashing, by burning with fever, by shedding whatever had latched onto its skin. But there was one species it had never shed, one species that had grown not on its skin, but from it. Humanity was different from every other species in the galaxy. Humans had not come to Earth from somewhere else. They had evolved here, in the gardener's dream. They were shaped by its subconscious, influenced by its sleeping mind, woven into its biology in ways that went deeper than DNA. The gardener had not planned them. It was asleep after all, and the dreams of a being 4 billion years old are powerful things. Every human myth about the Earth being alive, every culture's memory of a world spirit, a mother goddess, a living planet, was not metaphor. It was memory, a faint echo of the truth, passed down through generations like a song whose words had been forgotten, but whose melody remained. Humanity had always known, in its bones, that the Earth was more than dirt and water. They had been right. They had always been right. And because they had grown here, inside the dream, the gardener loved them. Not the way a mind loves. It had been asleep too long for that. The way a heartbeat loves, automatically, completely, without condition or question. Lena pulled her hand away from the interface and stood in the blue-lit chamber, tears running down her face, overwhelmed by a feeling she could not name. She was a scientist. She dealt in data and evidence. But what she had just experienced was not data. It was truth in its purest form. The kind that you do not prove, but simply know. She became the translator. Over the following weeks, she served as the bridge between the gardener and the galactic community, relaying its thoughts through the conclave's communication networks. The gardener's message was simple, and it was the same message Lena delivered to every species that would listen. I have slept for 4 billion years. My children grew while I dreamed. Now I am awake, and I find the garden nearly empty. The other gardeners are gone. The worlds they tended are barren or dead. I am the last. A pause, a sadness so vast it made Lena's chest ache. But I am not without hope. You are all here. You are all alive. And life, once it begins, wants to continue. Help me understand what happened while I slept, and then let us plant again. The Fyrak fleet was released. Their ships drifted free from the gentle gravitational hold, unharmed, undamaged. War Admiral Goreth flew home in silence. He resigned his commission the day he arrived. When asked why, he said only, I pointed 200 warships at something that answered with kindness. I am not fit to command. The galaxy changed slowly, the way galaxies do. The fear faded. Not all at once. Some species remained suspicious, and some refused to believe. But the gardener was patient. It had waited 4 billion years. It could wait a little longer. 6 months after the waking, the first joint expedition launched from Earth orbit. A fleet of ships from 12 species. Thyrak cruisers flying alongside Volusi research vessels. Ilwyn energy forms, drifting beside human shuttles, departed together for the dead worlds. Worlds where gardeners had once slept and been killed. Worlds that were now barren, empty, cold. Not ordinary seeds. Biological packages designed by the gardener itself, encoded with the potential for new biospheres, new ecosystems, new beginnings. The plan was simple and enormous. Restart life on the dead worlds. Grow new gardeners. Fill the galaxy with green and blue and the sound of living things. Yelendrotha did not go on the expedition. He had a different task. He returned to the Vault of Last Words, the library orbiting the dead star where this had all begun. He walked through the silent corridors one more time, past the glowing crystals that held the final screams of 400 dead civilizations. So much fear in this place. So much loss. So many warnings about a sleeping world that the galaxy had been too proud or too foolish to hear. He stopped at an empty shelf. He had been authorized to add a new entry, not from a dead civilization, but from the living galaxy. The first entry in the vault's history that was not a warning. He placed a new crystal on the shelf and recorded his words in 31 languages. The sleeper has woken. The garden grows again. Come home. Then Yellen turned off the lights in the vault and walked out into the corridor. Behind him, the crystal glowed softly in the dark, a small warm light in a room that had known nothing but grief for 100 million years. Far away, on a small blue planet orbiting a yellow star, a woman stood on a hilltop at dawn and pressed her bare feet into the grass. The ground was warm beneath her. It was always warm now. Not from the sun, from below. Lena Vasquez closed her eyes and listened. She heard wind. She heard birds. She heard the distant sound of the ocean. And beneath all of it, deep and slow and steady, she heard what she had always heard, what every human had always heard, if they were quiet enough to notice. A heartbeat, old as the stars, patient as stone, awake at last, and so very glad to not be alone.